Alright, so in this video I'm going to be going over various cantrips that are available in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So as you see, here's a list of all the ones I was able to find. I'm not going to specifically go through each class, just go through each cantrip A to Z. The cantrips that I'm using were from, I believe, Elemental Evil, the Player's Handbook, and from the starter spells Unearthed Arcana. So without further ado, let's get started. So Acid Splash, I've categorized that as an attack or an AoE spell. It does acid damage to one or two creatures, allows a save to avoid the damage, and it scales with level. It's not terrible. It's not very good. Acid damage works against most enemies and is also great against objects. Blade Ward is a defense cantrip. It costs an action, but it grants resistance to most weapons. It's more useful than it sounds. Imagine that you're a damage dealer, say you're a cleric, and your damage dealer in the party is toe-to-toe with the boss, and your choices are this or attack for a potential of 1d8 plus 2 damage. Suddenly, it's more important to keep that damage dealer kicking. Chill Touch. It's a nice attack and a debuff spell. It does a d8 necrotic damage. It scales with your level and prevents the target from healing until the next turn. It is great as well against undead. I think that's kind of an underutilized spell. The bonus against undead is amazing. Control Flame is a utility spell. It allows you to change the color or spread flames. It can be used to burn down a building very quickly, or add some flair to your drama, or to put out a light Witcher style, because you can also kill flames with it. Overall, it's not the most useful spell, but it's very thematic, and I like it. Create Bonfire is a utility or an attack spell. You can create a bonfire. If you create it on a space where there's another creature, it does a d8 of fire damage. It doesn't do a great amount of damage, and there's also another spell called Flame Bolt that we're coming up on here later. So it's kind of worse than Firebolt. The only thing is this one doesn't need anything to burn in order to create a fire. So that's, I guess, the only real benefit that I can see that you would want to take this over Firebolt. Dancing Lights, you have a utility cantrip. It creates lights. It can potentially be used to mislead foes, but it's super situational if that would work. Basically, Dancing Lights, it's like having a poor man's torch that you can remote control. Druidcraft is a utility cantrip. It allows you to be a force of nature. It's pretty cool for a druid cantrip. It allows you to create plants, mess with the weather, change the clouds, hug a tree, etc. Eldritch Blast. On its own, it's a pretty good cantrip. With warlock abilities, it really changes the game. Pros it is it has a very high range, allows for multiple attacks at higher level. Cons, because it's multiple attacks, chances are you're not going to be doing the maximum amount of damage with it. So you still have a chance to miss. But because it has multiple attacks, it also works well with some of the warlock stuff. So if you're a warlock, you're probably going to want to take Eldritch Blast. Firebolt. That's an attack cantrip. It has a great range. Great range is a 120-foot range as well. Good damage, does a d10 damage, and scales. Can be used to set things on fire, like lighting torches, bonfires, set towns on fire. It's pretty much my favorite cantrip for just killing things. The downside, at higher levels, it doesn't increase the number of targets you can hit, so at higher levels, you're still only restricted to one target per turn, which means you're not going to be taking out groups of enemies with this. Friends. Friends is a utility or a manipulation spell. I think it's a terrible cantrip. It has the same problems that charm spells have in this edition, is that once you try to charm your enemy, whether you fail or whether they're charmed but then it runs out, they know that you charmed them. It's kind of a stupid line if you ask me. I think charm spells are meant to be subtle. You may ask yourself, why did I do that afterwards, but I think it's more of a incriminating, I think. Frostbite. Frostbite is an attack or a debuff spell. It does a low amount of damage and allows the enemy to save to avoid, but if they fail, they take damage and also have a disadvantage on their next attack they roll. It's kind of a save or suck. The big problem I have with this is that if you do it, it doesn't guarantee they're gonna miss. It only does it for one attack. It doesn't do it for like their whole next turn, which kind of makes it meh. Guidance. It's a nice little cantrip that you can spam on yourself between fights to ensure you get a nice initiative roll, or to enhance an ally for an important attack when you can't help, or they're already being helped. Somebody's already using the help action on them. Overall, it's one of the better cantrips, similar to resistance. This one is a roll for an ability check, as opposed to resistance, which is a roll for a save. It's not clear if a initiative and a lot of the other ones are considered an ability check. But you know what? It probably is. I don't think a save is considered an ability check. Anyway, Gust. Gust is a utility or an attack spell. It pushes a creature or object away from you. It does great stuff for if you're trying to reposition your enemies. I think it's a very solid option, especially since if you push an enemy outside of the normal range of an attack, it'll provoke an opportunity attack, which is great. Hand of Radiance. This is one that I actually looked up after I'd finished the list, so I'm going to go over it here. It's a con save, but you can choose any number of targets around yourself within a 5-foot radius, and do a d6 radiant damage to each of the targets. It's kind of like Thunderwave, except better in my opinion, because you get to choose your targets, whereas Thunderwave just hits everything. Infestation. This is another one from the Unearthed Arcana. It does some piercing damage. If the target fails the con save, it causes them to move 5 feet in a random direction. This one is, in my opinion, inferior in every way to Hand of Radiance. It's also not very good. I don't like it, and not a big fan of it. All right, Light. Light is a utility cantrip. It, in my opinion, better for creating light than dancing lights, especially since it does a higher radius. And if you want, you could put light on something else and hand it to a party member, have them walking around with a nice lantern or torch or whatever. If you still want to remain stealthy, which is usually what you would need it for. As if you're already in the dark and you're a human or something that doesn't have dark vision, you need light. It's unfortunately light is kind of dark vision is a big problem in 5th edition because a lot of starting races, I'd say too many, have dark vision, so that's not great. And then also you could replace the spell with a 1 gold piece torch, which kind of defeats the purpose of having magic, doesn't it? Mage Hand. This is a utility spell. I like it probably more than it deserves. On one hand, it's limited telekinesis, which is awesome. The other hand, it's limited in purpose. So even if you have telekinesis, really, what are you going to do with that in a campaign? It doesn't do anything really in combat, except if you're an arcane trickster rogue, it's amazing because you can make it invisible, you can make a pickpocket, steal, pick locks, disarm traps, do other cool stuff from afar. Honestly, that's I think the reason most people pick to be arcane trickster is because this ability you get at 3rd level is great. Magic Stone is I consider it an attack one. It turns a rock into a 1d6 damage as a bonus action. Somebody I think said just 3 rocks. I have to look at the spell again, but whatever. It's decent. It allows you to replace your ranged weapons with a bag of rocks, basically. So if you're a rogue, honestly, I think that's a great trade. You don't have to carry around a bow and arrow. You can appear to be unarmed, but just have a bag full of rocks and turn them into magic rocks as you fire them off. Yeah. Anyway, I wish there was a way that you could use it to boost bolts or other projectiles as a bonus action using the same kind of ability. Like say if you did an arrow, you'd do an extra d4 damage or something like that. All right, Mending. Mending is a utility spell. It fixes things. Basically, it's one of the best spells I think for campaigns because it allows you to fix things to break campaigns. Say you found a decayed map in a dungeon, mend it. Suddenly you have a full map. Find a broken key, mend it. You have a full key. Find broke your sword, dagger, axe, mend it. It doesn't really fix magic items, but if you have just a mundane item, say you're smashing at doors and your weapon gets damaged, mend it. It only takes a minute. say you're talking about like an intrigue campaign, and you have a contract with somebody, and they tear up the contract. You know what? You can mend it. Suddenly, it's not. It's kind of game breaking in that way. Message. So message is another utility cantrip. I honestly don't like it very much because it's got a really low range. But it does have some uses, like if you're sneaking or stealthing and you want to talk to a party member who's out of whisper range, it allows you to whisper to them. I also noticed from the description, it said something about you point at your target and then it could be used through walls. And I'm like, well, what if you don't know where your target is? If you try to cast a spell, does it automatically make you point at them? That's just questions you ask. Probably not. I would say that's a little bit OP, but whatever. All right, next one. Minor Illusion. I believe that's a manipulation or an attack cantrip. I think it's pretty nice. Basically, if you're trying to run away from an enemy, you put a door in the wall, you duck through to trick your opponents, put a hole in a solid wall to cause Roadrunner-esque accidents. Basically, you put a fake hole in there and people run right into it. Put a wall in front of a hole you just hid in to create a nice hiding space. Put a pile of gold in an empty bag. Put a bag where an empty space was so you can take the real bag. Try to trick people. Say you're in a shop and you want to create a minor illusion of an item, take the real item and walk away. It's kind of a dick move to do, but it would work. It would potentially add some RP. You could be an awful thief. It gives you a minute to get away. It's great. All right, Mold Earth. It's a utility or a debuff spell. Creates a basically you can dig if you have a shovel. You can leave a message in the dirt, or you can create a patch of difficult terrain. So it has a little bit of combat use, not really much, but I'm not a huge fan of that one. Poison Spray. That's an attack cantrip. It does decent damage. It's actually the highest damage dice, a d12, that you'll find in any cantrip. Problem is it allows for a save. It doesn't have a great range. Doesn't have, great damage because of that save. And because it's poison, it's kind of easily resisted. You're probably going to be better off with like Chill Touch, Ray of Frost, Firebolt, Produce Flame, Eldritch Blast, or Shocking Grasp. Any of those other attacky cantrips. Well, we'll get into that a little bit later here. Prestidigitation. It's a utility cantrip. It's actually my favorite. I like that you can use it to clean objects, clean your clothes, change the color of your equipment, soil your opponents. Let's say, for instance, if you're interrogating them, you soil them so they feel like they just peed themselves. Dry yourself after getting out of a river. Be the only clean guy in the party, basically. And you can also allows you to do little tricks, like party tricks for orphans, like create little sparks and stuff. It does a lot of little things. I like it. It's one of my favorite ones. Primal Savagery. It's an attack cantrip. Allows you to do a melee spell attack to bite or claw at your opponents. It's not terrible, but it allows your druid to kind of be like a minor shapeshifter between fights. It's a druid spell. It's nice. It does d10s of damage. It does almost as much as a firebolt, except doesn't have that extra, burn that it causes afterwards. Produce Flame is an attack cantrip. It does less than firebolt, but it can also be used as its own light source, so it has some other uses. It's not terrible. It's not the best in my opinion, but it's not terrible. Ray of Frost. It's an attack cantrip. It does a medium amount of damage, but has a nice debuff attached to it. It does minus 10 to movement speed on any target damaged by it. It's used to keep your opponent slowed and to kite them. So you can basically hit them with a Ray of Frost if you're a rogue, do your 30-foot dash, and then move 30 feet, and then they can't keep up with you because you can keep doing it to them. Unless they're like a monk or something. Resistance. It's a utility or a buff. It's a d4 to a save within the next minute. So it's great, but it could be useful if you know something's coming or if you're putting somebody into a dangerous position to give them an extra d4 on their save. Like, for instance, a rogue going into a clearly trapped room. It gives them a chance to get out. So I like that one. But it's very short duration. It's not like previous editions where you just resisted temperatures for the rest of the day. Shape Water. It's a utility cantrip. It gives you the ability to freeze water or shape water with color. It also allows you to, well, the way I see it is, this is the perfect, like, if you wanted to make like a giant frozen sculpture in the middle of a party, it's a party spell, honestly. It's not great, but it also allows you to like create like a slippery surface, which would be nice because you can freeze water. It's very Avatar: The Last Airbender water shaper. It's great. Shillelagh. It's a buff or attack cantrip. Upgrades your D6 quarter staff to a D8. It only costs a bonus action, which is nice, but the bonus is so small that it's really not great. It also doesn't scale with levels, which makes it a terrible spell in my opinion. But thematically and historically, Shillelagh in previous editions was a beast because it would give you multiple damage bonuses to any blunt weapon, I believe it was. But anyway, Shocking Grasp, next one. It's an attack cantrip. It's good if you're taking it heavily armored opponents, but you wouldn't want to be in its effective range because it's a touch spell. It's not the greatest cantrip, but the advantage on attack practically guarantees you're going to hit. Practically, not really. It gives you like an extra, like 50% bonus basically. Spare the Dying. Sorry, I should go back. 50% bonus is not really. It's just more like it allows you to roll twice. You know how? I don't know. Anyway, Spare the Dying. It's a buff for healing cantrip. Useful for trying to save people if you have limited time to stabilize them. If you are out of healing spells, it's kind of like a get out of your party's dead free card, I guess. Because people who are down, if you don't have a healing spell, are kind of in trouble, and it allows you to do it as a range, I believe, too. I don't think it's a touch. Anyway, Thaumaturgy. It's a utility or manipulation spell. Gives you a booming voice, slam and unslam doors and windows that aren't locked. To do a bunch of poltergeisty things, which is it's neat. It's thematic. It's not terrible. Not good in any combat method, though, if you ask me. Although I have seen a lot of DMs allowing people to use their booming voice to try to intimidate, which by the book it's not, but rule of cool, a lot of DMs will still let them do it because, big 7-foot tall dragonborn sounding like he's about to charge you or something. I don't know. Works against small creatures. Whatevs. Alright, Thorn Whip. It's an attack or utility cantrip. It allows you to create a whip-like vine that does damage and pulls your target towards you. Scales at higher levels. Useful for reaching and repositioning enemies. Also causes opportunity attacks, just like some of the others that I've mentioned are great. Alright, I like Thorn Whip actually, it's pretty good. Thunderclap. It's an attack. It's an attack cantrip. Does an area effect. It's everything within 5 feet. It's a save or fail. If they save, they don't take any damage. But it does scale damage, and it does everything within 5 feet. So think of that as AoE at 0 level, so you can just spam it infinitely, which makes it good. Toll the Dead. It's an attack. Point at your opponent. They make Wisdom save, or take a D8 damage, necrotic. D12 if they're already injured, which it's pretty good. Now the fact that it's necrotic damage, I believe, actually makes it a little bit better than poison spray, but the fact that it's a wisdom save actually makes it a lot better than poison spray. It has a shorter range than like Firebolt. Is 60 foot. It's not terrible. And I'm sorry, Toll the Dead is another one of those Untitled Chapter ones. I probably should have said that right away. Alright, True Strike. Honestly, True Strike is my least favorite cantrip. I keep wanting to use it. I've put it on characters before and thought to myself, oh, this is going to be great. But let's look at it mechanically. You used an action this turn to give yourself advantage next turn. So if I had just attacked this turn and then attacked next turn, I would have already been rolling 2d20 for 2 separate attacks. But by giving myself advantage next turn, I'm basically foregoing my chance to hit this turn to make next turn slightly more likely that I'm going to hit. And I'm foregoing the chance of getting this second attack in. So it's not worth it, honestly, because you're basically trading 1 for 1. You trade your attack this round for half an attack next round. half an attack, basically. It's not worth it. Virtue. Virtue is a buff, grants 1d4 plus your casting modifier temporary hit points at the cost of an action, and requires a touch. It's awful in my opinion, because why would I want to be in touch range, and what is a d4 plus your modifier temporary hit points going to do anything? It's not going to help save somebody from dying. It might allow them to soak a little extra damage, but I don't know. Okay, maybe it's not that bad, because say you have a modifier of 4, a d4 plus 4, that's like a minimum of 5 bonus hit points. Then your teammate, let's say they take a hit the next turn, you basically just saved yourself from having to heal them for 5. Vicious Mockery. It's an attack cantrip, has the worst damage of any attack cantrip, allows a save to avoid any damage. It's kind of like a terrible damage spell, but there's nothing quite like trash talking your opponent to death. It's great. Also, it's a bard spell, and bards don't get a lot of other attack cantrips, so it kind of helps them out. Alright, next page. Attack cantrips. So in this list, I'm just going to read them off quick. Acid Splash, Chill Touch, Create Bonfire, Eldritch Blast, Firebolt, Frostbite, Gust, Hand of Radiance, Infestation, Magic Stone, Minor Illusion, Poison Spray, Produce Flame, Ray of Frost, Shillelagh, Shocking Grass, Thorn Whip, Thunderclap, Toll the Dead, True Strike, Vicious Mockery. And as you see my top 5 lists here, in the 5th place, Acid Splash. It has a limited AoE, which gives it more damage potential. Say you hit 2 targets for a d6, that's 2 to 12 damage range, because you're looking at the maximum and the minimum damages, which makes it pretty decent. And that's just at first level. 5th level, you double that, so 4 to 24 damage maximum, which is neat. Thunderclap is a decent AoE. It does 8 spaces around you and does damage times 1d6, so that's a potential of 8d6 damage if you're hitting every space around you with it. That's pretty solid, actually, if you ask me, for a cantrip. On top of which, it's spammable thunder damage, and it damages items too, or objects, so that's great. Hand of Radiance, I put that in there because it's also an AoE. It's just like Thunderclap, except you get to choose your targets, and the only other downside is that I believe the spell's wording says you can only target enemies, which means that you can't use it against objects. I kind of realized that after I made this list, but not that big of a deal, because you should also be taking Firebolt, number 2. Firebolt does great damage. It does fire, it creates torches, basically. And altogether, Firebolt would be my favorite spell, except for one that is superior, which is Eldritch Blast, because Eldritch Blast does force damage. It damages more foes better. Higher levels, you hit multiple targets. It scales great. If you're a warlock, it's especially great, because then you can buff it, give yourself your spell modifier to each attack on it, which makes for insane moments when you're using multiple Eldritch Blast bolts and using your spell modifier, which means you're adding 5 to each attack, and using Repelling Blast, which allows you to push enemies away using it, or if they're using like the Unearthed Arcana variant, I think there's a pulling one too, which means you get to cause them to provoke opportunity attacks, push them off of bridges, push them off of cliffs, push them away from you so they can't catch up to you, which is also great. So it's just a great spell altogether. Top 5 damage spells with some utility. This one I have Firebolt, because again, the torch factor is great. Thorn Whip, which allows you to pull, which also does the effect of causing your enemies to provoke opportunity attacks, which makes it great. I also like the thematics of it. Chill Touch, which allows you to hit your opponents and prevent them from healing. The other disadvantaging effect is highly underrated, which it disadvantages undead if you hit them with it. Gust, which allows you to push enemies away, push objects away, gives you a lot of little utility bits, and also allows you to provoke AOs. If you're a warlock, though, replace Gust with Eldritch Blast, because it will be better in almost every way. Minor Illusion is my top 5 damage spell with utility, on account that basically you're targeting an opponent and you're causing them to screw up something or believe something that's not really there, which could save you in multiple situations. It could also cause you to do some damage to them. Say you want them to trick them into walking off of a cliff or into a wall, or all sorts of other little shenanigans which I mentioned earlier. Creating fake piles of gold to trick them. Um, all sorts of little things you can do with it. You just got to be creative about it. All right, next section we have utility or buffing cantrips. For this we have Blade Ward, Control Flame, Create Bonfire, Dancing Lights, Druidcraft, Friends, Guidance, Gust, Light, Mage Hand, Mending Message, Mold Earth, Prestidigitation, Resistance, Shape Water, Spare the Dying, Thaumaturgy, and Thorn Whip. And as you see my list of the top 5, which I forgot to put the top 5 portion of it in there, not a big deal. We have Druidcraft. It's thematic. It allows you to create some unique situations. For instance, I played with a druid once who was playing as a wood elf, I believe it was, and they have the ability to hide if there's any obscurement, and he could create fog because of druidcraft, basically, or a light drizzle, which was enough to cause him to be able to be obscured and be able to hide in plain sight, basically. It was great. Guidance. Guidance is spammable and beneficial. Allows the build of a devout cleric to say their Hail Marys to their deity. It's nice, basically. Mage Hand, great for picking up books in a library, creating all sorts of shenanigans. Jumps to number 1 if you're an Arcane Trickster Rogue. Yeah, of course it does, because an Arcane Trickster can do so much more with it. Mending. I probably enjoy this too much. I told you a lot about Mending earlier. You can use it to break the campaign by unbreaking things. Put things back together, fix contracts, fix paper, fix maps, fix keys, all sorts of things. Fix your clothes. Say you got stabbed. I'll fix my clothes. Doesn't look stabbed anymore. Prestidigitation. Finally, that's my. You gotta be clean. You gotta be that fop who likes to have clean clothes, clean hair, smell nice, all that thing. On top of which you can use it as part of an interrogation tactic, because your enemy doesn't actually know what you're doing with that spark in your hand, even though it's a harmless prank. You never know. All sorts of things you can do with prestidigitation, but I like using it for cleaning, keeping a clean. I even made a character once who he used prestidigitation all the time because he was a hypochondriac. He liked cleaning things. Like, he wouldn't touch things unless they were cleaned. Wouldn't touch a peasant until he cleaned their hand using prest. Anyway, honorable mentions. Vicious Mockery. There's nothing quite like trash talking your opponents to death. It creates some truly hilarious moments because you can call your opponent like a fiddlewick ninny and he clutches his chest and dies because he can't live with the insult you just threw at him. I've read some other really good examples. Online campaign I was watching once, this guy was saying he was terrible at throwing insults, but it's just the fact that his insults were terrible and yet still killed goblins and such. He says, "Hey, you ain't got no legs," and the goblin go, "Oh no, I don't have any legs," and he would die. It was awful. Damage is low, it scales horribly, but better than nothing. Thaumaturgy. That one can create chaos and panic. It allows you to have some other situations where, for instance, if you're trying to pretend to be a psychic and you use the spell to create all sorts of weird effects and trick people. I don't know. I like tricking people in games. Control Flame. It's another thematic one. Allows you to seem like a true badass, or make a fire spread, or do other things. Say there's a candle on the table and you make it spread to 5 feet to the next table and just set the house on fire. Great. Horrible thing you can do. Whatever. It's great. All right. Poison Spray. It has the highest damage dice. It specifically is great against magic users because a lot of times magic users won't have a high con mod or con save. It's not terrible. You could also use Toll of the Dead instead of Poison Spray. That's the next one on the list because it does a similar effect except it's a Wisdom save and it's necrotic damage, and it only does a D12 if they're already damaged. But say you're in the middle of a fight, the fact that you're doing a D12 and a wisdom, a wisdom save is not always the highest for certain character types, or enemy types. Anyway, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.